Good morning, everyone. Dr. Pravin, founder and CEO of IndUS Pharmaceuticals, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Distinguished Speaker Series. This Distinguished Speaker Series is organized by IIE, Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship of SMU. My name is Arun, and I'm a third-year business student, and I will be your MC for today. So every year, IIE invites global exemplars in innovation and entrepreneurship to share their experiences with the SMU community and the public. Today, we are very honored to have Dr. Pravin R. Chaturvedi with us. Dr. Chaturvedi is a serial entrepreneur and an angel investor in the life sciences community. He is the founder of Boston-based IndUS Pharmaceuticals and the co-founder of Florida-based Oceanix Pharmaceuticals, and serves as the Chief Executive Officer on both of these companies. He remains the Chief Scientific Officer of San Francisco-based Napo Pharmaceuticals, and prior to his tenures at Napo and IndUS, he was the President and Chief Executive Officer of Boston-based Scion Pharmaceuticals. Dr. Chaturvedi also serves on the boards of Fuelet Schools, Celanix, Pradhan USA, and Sindhu Research Laboratories, and has previously served on the boards of Thai Boston as well. He is the chairman of the Scientific Advisory Board for Pivot Pharmaceuticals, a Canadian biotech company, and serves as an advisor to several other enterprises and organizations. He is also an adjunct faculty member at Georgetown Medical School. Over his past 25 years of career, Dr. Chaturvedi has participated and led discovery and development activities for several new chemical entities, culminating in his successful development and commercialization of several new drugs that are currently marketed by various companies. Dr. Chaturvedi spent several years at Vertex Pharmaceuticals as the head of lead evaluation and was in the preclinical group at Alkermes. He started his career in the product development group at Park Davis Warner Lambert Company, now known as Pfizer, and Dr. Chaturvedi also holds a PhD in pharmaceuticals. Today, Dr. Chaturvedi will outline the general patterns of success and failures in entrepreneurship in the United States, and also discusses the roles of new biotech value creation. So without further ado, let's give a round of applause and welcome Dr. Chaturvedi.
Thank you, Arun. You guys can hear me? Okay. I don't like to stand behind it, so I'll stand here, okay? And I'll stand on this side, okay? So over the next 40, 45 minutes, hopefully we'll have a rich dialogue. Initially, it'll sound like a monologue from me, but hopefully it'll convert to a dialogue on biotech value creation. And biotech enterprise value creation is something that most people don't have the risk appetite for. So part of the reason for me being invited here is to inspire some of you, hopefully all of you, to take the dive and do things that we do in terms of creating impact in the field of medicine and alleviating human suffering. That's basically what biotech is all about. So nothing here will be an epiphany for any of you. What is defined as the value of any new enterprise is it must have clear and significant impact. Anybody who's an entrepreneur will tell you that they only care about the 6-letter word impact. Most of us who are wannabes, who I call wantrepreneurs, not entrepreneurs, fall in the trap of the 7-letter word impress, okay? We are not about impressing, we are about making impact. And so you must have a thought around what is the differentiation for your service or your product value as you start out an enterprise. And the value proposition should be self-evident. If you say, I am going to make something to diagnose cancer earlier or treat cancer earlier, nobody will ask you what the value of that is, because everybody understands that it's a terminal illness, and the later you go, the worse it gets. So, sort of, as Arun said, I'm not only an entrepreneur, I'm addicted to entrepreneurship, and I also invest in my founding teams, who are science teams. And so I'm an angel investor as well, And one of the things that you may find very anomalous, because no business school book will teach you this, is that I give about 50 to 80% of my company to my scientific founders. I invest in them, but they hold the lion's share of the equity. And the 5 things we look for, 5 things before I invest, is obviously market. In the field of biotech, it is not a question. You make a good drug or a good diagnostic, you're going to be fine. Okay? There are 3 truths to being a living organism. You're going to get old, you're going to get sick, and you are going to die. So there is no question about the value there. The market is huge. If you're going to make an impact, it's going to happen. So therefore, what happens is, what is your product differentiation value? And that comes from the uniqueness. And the uniqueness will basically reflect itself in intellectual property, in technical edge, and ultimately in profitability. Another big lesson that serial entrepreneurs like me know is that cash is trash, but profits are king. Okay? So anybody that tells you I raised $20 billion today doesn't mean a hill of beans if they're spending $23 billion, because they're not making any profit. So the enterprise value is negative $3 billion. Okay? So at the end of the day, anybody that tells you that I raised so much money, it's a necessary but insufficient condition for an enterprise value. Perhaps the most important thing we look for is management capabilities, which is domain expertise. Why the person that you want to invest in? And so we look at them, and then we build a team around them. So because all the biotech companies we create are all founded by scientists, each one of them is a PhD or an MD or an MD PhD, we know that we will need some help on the business aspects, on the finance aspects, but those are easily fixable. What cannot be fixed is what's in those people's heads and in their hearts. And so we look at people and we recruit them for their hearts and their mind. And then it is our job, the elders, the ones who are putting in the money and taking board roles, to basically make sure that we develop a sustainability equation around that. Because biotech, as you will see later in the talk, it takes about 20 to 22 years and about $2 billion to make one product. Nobody's going to give you $2 billion US dollars when you walk in there and say, I'm going to make the next drug to treat disease XYZ. So you got to figure out how you're going to sustain yourself through the life cycle. And there's one guarantee of the biotech companies. It will go through many metamorphoses and processes. You'll become another company, you'll become another company, you'll become another company. But the common theme in those companies will be your product. And so you have to be accepting of that. Make sure that your barrier to entry is good, because that's all you can protect. Anybody who talks about freedom to operate, I think they're just giving lawyers your good money away. Because freedom to operate analysis cannot be done until you have a product. So all you can do is actually create a barrier to entry. It's like building a house and putting a gate so that somebody has to knock to get in. Okay, that's what you want. You try to make yourself insensitive to business cycles. Why is that very important? The market's hot right now. Biotech is the hottest sector on the NASDAQ right now. In the last 2 years, it has returned 510%. Never before I have seen that. It's also going to be the most volatile in about 2 years. And you'll be minus 500%. Okay? So you try to make yourself insensitive to business cycles that you do through product value, through sustaining yourself by technology development. And pivoting. One of my companies is called Pivot. But pivoting is very important. Pivoting means you're developing a product to treat cancer, but you see a collateral benefit in infectious disease, which is a shorter time to market. Don't ignore it. Don't be so focused on just the cancer product that you've ignored the faster time to market with another opportunity. So you must be able to pivot. And that's what your board should be able to do and say, I think this also looks very interesting. What can we do about that? And then exit value. Everybody talks about exit values. As a sector, most of our exits happen in M&As, as you will see. We get merged or acquired. Some of us actually do IPOs. Last year was one of the better years for us. And I think about 25 biotech companies went public on the NASDAQ. That's 25 out of 5,000. Okay, so just to put that into perspective. So most of us will basically go through that as an M&A, and you as a founder, as a board member, as a C-level exec, should be absolutely comfortable with that somebody else will come in. If you focus on building something that has value, somebody else will be proud to own it and sell it. That's your victory. Don't build something and say, it's all mine, it's all mine, it's all mine, I don't want anybody here. Then you will not build anything. Now, there are some early symptoms for trouble, and that's another role for the board. Okay? The first thing is market problems. It's very important, most important, to think about customer acquisition. If you think that your value proposition is going to not be relevant, because remember, it takes 22 years, so you're treating a disease of the future. So by then, 1,000 other strategies will have come in play. And so by the time your product comes to market, you may or may not be as relevant as you are today. You should think about that and look at the competitive landscape, because the wrong market timing will kill you. So you should always think about that. Even in biotech, we are not insensitive to that, because people evolve, people change. Okay? The business model failure is a common theme across all enterprises. If the cost of customer acquisition far exceeds the cost of the sale price of your product, you do not have a viable business. Okay? So what that means is if you have to sell a drug and you have to spend $10 to make a sale of $1, it's an unsustainable value proposition. Okay? Your $10 must definitely earn you $100 in sales. By the time you put all your operating cash and everything, you might have 25 to 30% profit. So one must always think about monetization of the customer acquisition piece. Poor management team, and for that matter, actually bad boards, guaranteed recipe for failure. Okay? So just think very hard about what is it that my management team has. Are they good in science? Are they good in strategy? Are they good in execution? Because you have to execute with discipline. Inadequate funding. So there are 4 things you need to build an enterprise. It's like your palm of your hand. You cannot forget. You need a good idea. That's your index finger. More important than a good idea is a great team. A great team. More important than the idea, but less important than your great team, is a good board and mentors. And then you need a little bit of cash. It's always good to have cash starvation, because it makes you do the right thing. So biotech succeeds where pharma cannot, because we have no tomorrow. We live on the brink of extinction every day. And I was telling Krishna this morning, we wake up in the morning and say, I'm not going to die today. I'm going to die, but not today. So therefore, I'm going to do whatever is necessary to live through another day. That's not the case for large pharma, large biotech, because I'll show you some data later on of how much cash they have. And therefore, they have no incentive to do anything different. And then the last, obviously, everybody understands that the product does not address a market need, you're not going to sell much of it. So if aspirin is working, and you try to make another better aspirin and you charge 10 times what aspirin costs, nobody's going to buy your drug. So effectively, the main thing I want you to take away from this slide is not a whole bunch, but the last point. Execution, execution, execution. 98% of success of all companies is hard work. Every day getting up and doing it. Because there are 2 things that are going to happen to you that are going to be real. One is your science will be going exactly in the opposite direction of what you thought it would. That's number 1. The second thing is, when you are that disappointed, are you going to get up and try and do something different? And if the answer to the second question is no, then get out now. Because in biotech, it's a business of failure. Okay? It's a business of failure because 1 out of 10,000 molecules comes to the market. Sometimes 1 out of 100,000. So it is not something that is self-evident. It is an iterative process, and it's a hard grind. And so you must always be prepared for that. So let's talk about the cash starvation, okay, the funding climate. Okay? So let's first dispel with 2 myths that have been around in other parts of the industry, which is myth number 1, output of any venture is directly proportional to the input funds. The absolute opposite of that is true. good companies absolutely do a disproportionate return on the input funds. In fact, it is more than sixfold, and that research was done in the United States at Harvard in 1956. So that thing has been true for 60 years, hasn't moved. Sixfold or greater return is what happens. The key driver of disproportionality is innovation. Now, innovation in biotech or any other enterprise is a necessary but insufficient condition, because in addition to innovation, you should be able to translate that to a product, because just having innovation doesn't mean anything. Having something new doesn't mean anything unless you've translated that to a product. And then if you've translated that to a product, it's still insufficient if you cannot commercialize it. So the three stools are innovation, translation, commercialization. Okay? Second myth is large corporations are better suited compared to small entities. Nothing could be further from the truth. Large companies only focus on optimizing a routine thing, mind-numbing repetition. They can do the same thing over and over again well. They're good about process. They're not incentivized to innovate. Small companies, as I said, we are on the brink of extinction. We do not have tomorrow. We can only do something better. If you do not have chairs in this auditorium, you'll figure out a way to sit. That's innovative. But if you have a chair, you're not motivated to think about making a chair. So same applies. And the last point is large firms also have a misalignment of incentives. What that means is you are paid not to make a mistake. And the only way you don't make a mistake is by not doing anything. Because ladies and gentlemen, anybody that does something will make a mistake. And we like those people. But we are called biotech. Pharma fires them. We love them. Okay? Because they tried something. Not because they're a bunch of crazies, but they tried something different. On average, in the United States, every year 500,000 new enterprises are started, 500,000 each year. Okay? So this is data from 1996 to 2002 for sales in the 6th year after formation of a company. Okay? And the bars are at the bottom. What percentage of companies failed right at the beginning? 50%. Okay? So they had zero revenue. 6th year, less than $100,000 in revenue, another 10%. That's 60%. 6th year, revenues less than 500,000, another 25%. So that's 85%. 6th year, revenues less than $1 million, another 5%. That's 90%. Then the remaining 6th year revenue of 5 to 10 or greater than 10 million with the remaining 10%. Okay? So 500 plus thousand companies started. 90% of them in the 6th year have revenues less than 1 million. And this is across all the sectors. This is not biotech. I'll come to biotech in the after this. So let's look at the biotech. The biotech is the second line on this. And you can see the slide a little better. So if you look at the biotech and healthcare sector, this is for the 20 years, about 2,500 companies. The companies that failed outright were 20%, same number. And companies that had IPO were 19%, okay, over a 20-year period. So if you look at that, and this is the pre-money, right? So median pre-money was about 100 million at IPO. 150 million was the average. And median pre-money for all values exceeding 50 million was about 135 million. So you can see that of the companies we started in 20-year period, 2,500 companies, only 20%, 19% of them even had an IPO. The other companies were all dead, okay? Similarly, if you look at the ventures for data for companies funded in the less active versus the more active periods, and this is for all companies, firms that had an IPO, the age of the firm at an IPO was about 6.5 years. And the median dollars that had gone in was about 32 to 51 million, although 44 million was the median number. And they had a median pre-money valuation of 200 to $300 million. Again, for 19% or less of the companies that actually had that exit. So types of investors that are in the biotech sector in the United States are no different than who they are in Singapore. So we also have angels, friends, and family. If you take money from friends and family, please be sure you're guaranteed to lose your friends and family, okay? So I would advise you not to take money from friends and family. Angels and venture capitalists, they're two sides of the same coin. They do detailed evaluation processes. They do great due diligence. And then they'll decide when to invest and not invest. But the key thing that comes out for an entrepreneur out of that is a validation of the business model. Because when you have people like this look at it, you get feedback. And that's more value add than their money. So I would think that. Grant funding that we get, SBIR grants, are similar to, you must have the same schemes here. That's insufficient amount of money, but it's good to get seed capital to get the companies going. We certainly take advantage of that because it's non-dilutive. And then there are some incentives from local, state, or federal authorities. Those are perilous because A, they're political, so you worry about them because with the changing winds, they will disappear. The second thing is they might have destroyed your business model in the process because governments are focused on creating jobs. The biotech as an industry and enterprise value is interested in creating value and impact. So the two are not necessarily aligned. More jobs doesn't mean more value. Okay. Strategic partners are probably the most important source in biotech in particular because they are your ultimate customers. So today, as you'll see the data, of any of the large pharmas, Pfizer, Merck, any of them, do not have any internal R&D programs that have produced a molecule that's on the market. More than 95% of the drugs that they market were developed by others, biotech companies. Because as my friend at Pfizer once told me, there is no price you can command that I cannot afford. Okay? So in 20 years' time, that might be a different story, but right now, that's what they do. So getting them to invest in your venture is actually a good thing. Okay? And role of investors is to conduct extraordinary amount of due diligence. They actually look at competitive advantages. They also reach out to other potential investors. So the great thing is if I'm investing, because investors are like lemmings, they follow the herd. So one guy is doing it, then somebody else feels like he or she is going to be left out, that person will join. If two are doing it, three more want to join. Okay? So when investors do that, especially when they're not related to the founders, if they're related to the founders, remember that friends and family thing comes in. Okay. And then investors also recruit management and board members, which is actually quite valuable. And then one of the things that we do really well is to ensure disciplined execution. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the most important thing you should take away from. There is no substitute for hard work, and you will be expected to do it every day. It's a grind. This is a much better slide. So here's the venture capitalists. So let's talk about venture capital. Okay, there are 462. This is data from 2010. So the data has changed a little bit, but not so vastly. There are 462 venture capital firms in the United States. The total amount that has been invested is about $22 billion by the venture capitalists. Okay. And they did that across 2,700 companies, and only 1,000 of them were funded for the first time. Now, remember my slide that I showed earlier? What number of companies are founded in the United States every year? 500,000. Only 1,000 of them receive venture money. What's the percentage of companies that get venture funding? 1 in 500. Okay? So when venture capitalists come and tell you that we create companies, nothing could be further from the truth. It's angels and entrepreneurs and serial entrepreneurs who create companies. Okay? So they invest the numbers and basically look at the return. So this is the gross return, this is the number of companies, and you can look at gross return divided by total investment. It's a ratio. Look at the number of companies that have less than 1 as a ratio, gross return, 60%. So these are the people that are supposed to know how to invest, and their return divided by total investment is less than 1, 60% of the companies. So they don't know what they're doing. Somewhere between 1 and 3, less than 3, is about 20%. Okay? Between 3 and less than 5 is about 15%. Between 5 and 10 is about another 15%. And this is the astronomical 1 number for greater than 10 that makes up for 87% of the failures. So they play basically going to Vegas and playing many odds. Okay? That's how they make their money. That doesn't mean value has been created. That does not mean the product will ever be to the market. This is just their return. Okay? So just keep that in mind because we'll come back and visit this data. What's the role of governments? In the United States, the seminal act was Bayh-Dole Act, which was passed in 1980, which basically allowed us to license technologies out from universities. That Bayh-Dole Act is the reason biotech industry was started, because without that, we could not have done licensing of all these technologies from universities because they were funded on NIH dollars. So that legislation is really important to us for licensing. And then the other thing is that they have the capital gains tax legal financial structure, so that if you hold stock for longer than a year, you only get taxed at 20%, which is half the normal rate. And so that created an incentive structure for investors to invest, because capital gains is really good. And they have created, state governments have created a lot of accelerators and incubators, and they help with business plans. But those are less important to us than those two big things, tax incentives and the licensing technologies. So now let's talk about the main ingredient, the entrepreneur, okay? So this is the Gartner's hype cycle. There is such a thing in the United States called a hype cycle. We measure a hype cycle every year. It's published every year by Gartner. So you can look up. This is as of August 18th of this year. So just to give you a thing here, the plateau will be reached in less than 2 years is on this slope. Within 2 to 5 years is on the ascending slope. 5 to 10 years is the trough of disillusionment, okay? And then the slope of enlightenment and plateau of productivity. So you can think about all the technologies that are on this curve, which is on peak of inflated expectations. So if you go up here all the way, micro data centers, digital dexterity, smart advisors, advanced analytics with self-service delivery, autonomous vehicles, Internet of Things. These are all in the peak of inflated expectations. Look at the trough of disillusionment. Natural language answering, consumer 3D printing, hybrid cloud computing, augmented reality. That's all in the trough of disillusionment. And then slope of enlightenment is autonomous field vehicles, virtual reality, gesture control, and enterprise 3D printing. So when we have business plans submitted to us, we look at, on the Gartner's hype cycle, where do they fall? The ones we are most afraid of are the peak of inflated expectations, because we know there's only going one way, it's going down. We like to get in here, which is the innovation trigger, and get out here before the peak of, before the trough of disillusionment sets in. So that basically puts out two types of entrepreneurs. Across the world, this is true. One type of entrepreneur is the one who wants to build value, and another one who wants to extract profits from the system. Remember I told you earlier, cash is trash, but profits are king. And so it's okay to be an entrepreneur that says, I can make profit here because there's a window of opportunity. But you have to execute so marvelously to actually take advantage of that. So for that, you have to have, we evaluate the knowledge level of the entrepreneur. We make sure that they have the requisite domain expertise and has the unfair advantage, the competitive edge. Some of them build the enterprise for the right reasons, which are the social and economic impact. Some of them only do it for narcissistic reasons, for personal glory and gain. So earlier this morning, we were talking about the dark triad of entrepreneurs. The dark triad of entrepreneurs, Virginia is right here. Narcissism, pathological, and Machiavellism. Those are the three traits. Guaranteed recipe to be disastrous. So we look about that. And the top 10 mistakes that entrepreneurs have made in the United States, these are pretty much applicable across the world. So first thing is failing to understand the real business opportunity. You'll be surprised how often that happens. Failing to address competition. That happens more often than not. Building the wrong structure or the wrong team, being unrealistic, and overvaluing their business at critical junctures, allowing molehills to grow into mountains by not actually communicating what's not working, failing to maximize your competitive advantages, assembling the very wrong group of investors, and failing to then manage expectations with investors. These are the top 10 mistakes made by all entrepreneurs. I would stay away from trying to do any of them, but there's no way you know that when you're doing it. So your board and your mentors, that's their role, to tell you whose money to take, how much to take, and why to take. Because there's more to value than money. 80% of entrepreneurs got zero return on their equity in their startups. This is for 500,000 companies. okay? And 20% got about $0 to $20 million in equity. 5% got $20 to $50 million. 1% got $50 to $100 million. Rest of them, nobody got 500 to a billion or a billion over. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, those are the only examples. Facebook guy, there's 6 guys that probably can talk about that number here, okay, out of 500,000 companies. So don't put yourself in a camp where, say, I'm going to be Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs. You know, none of them started their companies to make more than $1 billion. They started their company because they felt there was a need and there was a market opportunity. And then the market took them by the storm, and that's called a rising tide. So you want to be a part of a rising tide. So let's talk about pharmaceutical industry because that's what we hear about. So this is dated numbers from Boston from my friend Joe DiMasi, who's at Tufts University. He tells me we're going to speak we give a course at Harvard every November, and he sent me new numbers just yesterday. And he says it's now $2.5 billion. I told him I'm not changing my slides, because if I show someone that I have to make $2.5 billion to make one drug, they'll run away from the audience. So, but the number is, whether it's 1 billion, 1.5 billion, or 2 billion, it's a large number. So don't worry about that. The number of drugs approved, last year, 2014, there were about 40 drugs approved. So that is the number of new molecular entities approved by the FDA since 1963. FDA started to get involved in drug approval post-1962 because of a disaster with a drug called thalidomide. How many of you are familiar with thalidomide? 1, 2. Okay, for those of you who don't know, thalidomide was a drug that was given to pregnant women to basically induce sleeping and to help them. And their children were born without arms and legs. It's called fecomelia. And that's because the compound was teratogenic. So during trimester 2, they basically stopped the development of arms and limbs. So the FDA decided from then on that it would not allow drugs to be approved unregulated for medical use. So that's why this term starts in 1963. And as you can see, that the cost of drug development is in this hill that we have. So on average, the industry in the United States spends $50 billion per year. $50 billion in R&D per year. And it gets 40 drugs approved, roughly, every year. So if you divide 50 billion by 40, that's how you get 1.3 billion per drug. That does not take into account the other 100,000 molecules that died. And if you think about net return relative to R&D costs, and this is the after-tax R&D cost, let's say it's $500 million, only 10% of them basically get about 6 times the R&D cost. About 20% of them get about the 2 times the R&D cost. 30% of them are at R&D cost. The rest of them are below R&D cost. So as an industry, as I mentioned earlier, biotech industry is a business model of failure. So you think about it and you say, my cost for customer acquisition is going to be larger than the sales revenue. So you have to basically build a pipeline that will allow you to hedge, where you'll make up the shortfall. And that cannot be done with a single product company. So that's why most of us build biotech companies that are platform companies. We'll talk about that. Now, these are the numbers from 2005 to 2015, estimated sales for Pfizer. These are the top 6 companies in the United States in pharma. We'll just take example of Pfizer. So Pfizer estimated sales in 2015 are about $111 billion from existing products. And this is what's needed from new products, $65 billion, for them to have double-digit net earnings per share, which means they have to get 8.6 new drugs approved each year. 8.6 new drugs. There's only one truth to that. No freaking way. It's not going to happen. Okay? So you think about it, GlaxoSmithKline is in the same boat, Merck is in the same boat. Nobody can get even 1 drug approved per year. They're lucky if they're getting 1 drug approved every 2 years. So if they need to get 6 to 10 drugs approved every year, the only way they're going to do it is they're going to amalgamate. They're going to buy companies. If biotech does not exist, pharma has nothing to sell. Okay? So part of the reason for opportunity for all of you in the audience is to create biotech companies is because they will be looking for products. Because that's the only way they can make sales revenue. Because they have a marketing machine. They're a commercial machine. but they cannot innovate and translate so quickly. So that's why biotech exists. It fits that gap. As an industry, the pharma R&D spend is expected to be $140 billion this year. Okay? The growth per year is only 1.8%. Okay? The number of new molecular entries is about 42. So effectively, we are looking at an industry that's actually slowing down in the growth. So we're a rich industry, pharmaceutical and biotech industry. This is 2015. Our total worldwide total market for our prescription drugs is expected to be about $780 billion this year. And by 2018, it's expected to be almost $900 billion. But the trouble is, look at this. This is the growth rate. And see how jagged that is and how poor that is. Okay? So as an industry, and generics are just on the top, okay? So anybody that just thinks to make generic companies, their sales are not going to be that great. And you can only make a generic for a new drug that goes off patent. So if new drugs are not created, there will be no generic industry either. So don't forget that. So here are the global pharma dollars that has grown. I just showed you that. And so let's talk about financing, right? We talked about venture capitalists earlier. So these are the last 5 years of data, 2007 to 2012. So this is the deal value. The deal value is at top. So you can look at venture capital investment in the biotech sector in the US. It's somewhere between $4.3 to $6.7 billion. It's an impressive number. That roughly shows only 400 companies were invested. They received the money. Only 400. Boston alone, at any given time, has 600 companies. And the total number of companies in the US that exist as biotech is about 1,300. And so if you remember that number, and you look at what's been invested, these are the dollar numbers, okay? This is the aggregate number. This is quarterly venture funding. So maximum, a good quarter, they will say, oh, you know, we put in 15 million per company, okay? The companies receiving money for the first time are here at the bottom. You guys can see that, ladies and gentlemen? Venture capitalists gave them less than $1 million. And these are from 2004 to 2013. So it's a 10-year data. So this is the data you will not see. You will see these numbers, but you will never see these numbers. So for a startup entrepreneur, that's the ecosystem you're fighting in. You might get $1 million from them at the most. So you have to think about alternate sources of financing. Now we talked about family and friends, divorce, losing family, so not a good idea to get money from them. Patient foundations have become really important in the United States because as we get older, we have formed a lot of patient foundations, and there are foundations that are focused on rare diseases, they're more efficient, and they give larger grants. So we actually go and talk to them because they also bring a bandwidth of successful medical and scientific people. High net worth individuals and angel investor groups, they're too diversified, they have a lack of focus, but we are trying to organize them into boxes. So for instance, in Boston, we have 26 angel groups. That's probably the most of any city in the United States. And collectively, we probably invest about $100 million per year in a bunch of companies across all sectors. Venture capitalists, you have to basically give up total control and incentive for the founders. So what has happened is in the US, venture capitalists are forming their own companies. So they raise money and they form their own companies. They're appointing their own people. So people like you who come and pitch business plans, unlikely to get funded. So your board and your mentor should prepare you for that. It's good to get feedback, but don't set your expectations that you'll get money from them. Private equity, they only fund growth stage biotechs, so they will ask you what your revenue stream is. If you had revenue stream, Pfizer will be your partner. So you won't need private equity guys. So that's where the pharma partners come in. That's the best alignment of incentives. So every pharma company now has a venture arm and an innovation arm, and they will work with you. And so pharma itself has re-engineered itself to become a partner of biotech. So that's the big advantage. So this was the former model. So I've been doing this for 15 years, starting my first company. I've started, as Arun pointed out, 4 or 5 companies. We used to get money from angels and venture capitalists, and then foundations, and then private equity used to come when we were in phase 2, and then large pharma and biotech would come to partner with us. But now that whole ecosystem has evolved to Angels are doing from R&D to phase 1, pretty much funding that bandwidth. Venture capital fund are only funding very, very low clinical stage programs. Family offices, foundations, venture philanthropy is doing end-to-end. So patient groups have really formed a big part of the ecosystem now to help us. Private equity and hedge funds are doing similar to venture capitalists, and large pharma and biotech corporate ventures have again done what the family offices are doing. So basically, these two groups have taken over in the US what was previously done by venture capitalists and private equity groups. So what's success factors, right? So success factors are 3. Most precious commodity, ladies and gentlemen, is time. Never comes back. Most precious resource is people. They are the ones who are going to make you win or lose. And most precious asset is the potential of the promise. The potential of the promise. So if you think about time, you must make sure that you're leveraging new technologies in a global economy. So what happens in Singapore affects us, and what happens in Boston affects Singapore. We cannot live in silos anymore. So just think about it in a global setting, and think about how to translate those new products for commercialization. So the fastest time you can do these two pieces, the better off you're going to be. People, most important, as I said, that's the middle finger. Build the right team in a network setting. No longer do you need to have large glass and steel structures with everybody in one place. The world is virtual. All of you guys do so much with your handheld devices. You can launch a bloody rocket, right? So we don't need to have you in the same place, in the same time zone. So we have teams around the world. People doing things in Singapore, in Japan, in Europe, in United States, on the West Coast. So build it in the network setting. Get the best people to work with you. You don't need to see them. You don't need to micromanage them. Types of people you need for a biotech enterprise. You need a biologist, you need a chemist, pharmacologist, physician, regulatory affairs, and business person. As I said, when I start companies, I give a lion's share of the company to my scientists. And they get a lion's share of the company because they have only one thing to look forward to, which is dilution. So that way, when the company exits, they have some piece to hold on to their own. The potential of the promise, most important, addresses the needs of the patient. All my companies are started with only one thing in mind. What does the patient need? What is the patient getting now, and what does the patient need tomorrow? And that's where you start. And if you can improve their wellness and reduce hospitalization, you will have a successful biotech enterprise. So in Boston, we have a few advantages, right, which Singapore may or may not have, but I'm hoping that you guys will do this. One is we basically are restlessly discontented. I introduce myself not like Arun introduced me. I always tell people I've been unemployed for 15 years, okay? Because I like starting companies from scratch. I don't hold a job. I start my company and see what happens, right? People think they call me a serial entrepreneur. Some people say I'm serially stupid. Both are true statements, right? But basically what happens is between having new technology mavens, people like me, having great academic and business universities in one town, which we have. Boston has 300 universities and colleges within a 50-mile radius. 250,000 folks like you available to us at any time. That's intoxicating. And then we have spillover and Brownian motion, because as we walk around and we run into people like Krishna or Kripal, and we ask them, what are you doing? And they say, oh, I'm doing this. What do you want to do? And all of a sudden, over a paper napkin, we have a new idea for a new company. So that's how new biotech ventures are created, by people talking to people, not on their handheld, let me tell you. We must make eye contact, shake hands, have body contact, okay? So don't do everything by your little handheld. What are common themes in all the successful companies we've had? We set big, ambitious goals, okay? We're going to cure cancer. We're going to cure so-and-so, diabetes, you know. And then we go out and assemble the right team of people. Don't go out looking for money, look for people. You know, so we identify an area of need where the patients need it, get the right team, then we align the goals and the incentive. So as I said, my scientific team from wherever we get technology, in addition to paying the university the licensing fees, the founding scientists, the group of them, get a lion's share of the company so that they can say that their incentives are aligned. Constantly looking for new technologies. So once we license one set of technology, we don't sit We are traveling. So yesterday I was meeting a group here in Singapore. Hopefully tomorrow we can meet another group, right? So that's the whole idea. Go around the world, keep looking at new things. Persevere through failures, adapt to changing climates. Market climates are guaranteed to change. Just like market research, there's only one truth about market research. It's guaranteed to be wrong. So you must adapt yourself, okay? So you respect discontent, seeking excellence, right? So you cannot be a malcontent. A malcontent is someone who constantly complains and doesn't do anything. Discontented person always try to improve, excel. They're Roger Federer. You know, if he's not winning, he goes and gets Stefan Edberg so he can learn a new way to play the game. Have open and honest communication. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no bigger thing than to tell how you feel and how you, if you don't speak, nobody will know what you're thinking. And if you're going to be very sugar-coated around it, nobody will really know what you mean. So it's okay to be disagreeable. Rapid decision-making, most important, have accountable leadership. If you're going to take the C-level role, be the first one to be fired, not the last one to be fired. Okay? So in biotech, effectively, we look at new technologies, we get the founders, we get some seed capital, then we assemble the core team, we validate the product, we get partners, we develop target product profiles. I didn't talk about it for this reason, Kripal, because I thought it'll come up. Then we raise a larger amount of money, and we translate that to a product. Okay? So bigger is definitely not better. As I showed you, biotech, big biotechs, they don't succeed. You need small teams, they're committed teams. Disruptive, chaotic, discontented means they're going to be creative. Okay? Key question that they ask is, what are we going to do? They never ask how to do something. Always think about, what are we going to do? Make decisions, set our expectations right. Non-bureaucratic. It's an Arthur's table of knights. Everybody is equal. Impact-oriented philosophy. Nobody has careers in biotech because we are all going to be fired tomorrow. We can't make payroll, we are shutting down, okay? Debate and disagreements are welcome. If your data are not coming out the way you thought, you go and talk and say, you know, I did everything, and this thing is what it's showing. What does this mean? So you have to correct that. These core initial people define the culture of the biotech. And then the key members of those teams then become future leaders. So for instance, at Vertex, there were 12 of us who were the dirty dozen that reported to the CSO and CEO. All 12 of us in the last 15 years have gone on to start new biotechs. The number of companies we have started exceeds the number of companies that the top 3 had started. We've started about 24 companies, all 12 of us, okay, collectively. So I think those are the advantages. That's a collateral benefit of doing this. So this is basically the network model that I was talking about. That pharma, if you think about percent of the clinical pipeline, large biotechs was 33% 10 years ago. Now this number is down to 5%. This side has gone to 95%. So biotech owns that. Percent of R&D spending, only 4% of the R&D spending comes from biotech. 98% of the spending comes from large pharma. That's how wasteful they are, inefficient. Percent of the cash, we have none. We don't have a P&L, we only have L, okay? And 92% of the cash resides in large pharma and biotech. 92% of that whole sector that I just showed you, 700 billion of. And percent market cap, it's weighted by 97% by the large 6 to 10 companies. We have minus 3% weightage on the NASDAQ index. So effectively, this is the ecosystem that requires us to basically do alliances. So this is what pharma is doing. It's now doing tons of deals. So in the 5-year period between 2005 2010, 2,000 plus deals were done across all stages. Between 2011 and 2015, that number has actually gone up. So it's still going to come out at the end of this year, and I'll update that. So I think the main thing here is we have to manage expectations because they carry a huge technical risk. We have to communicate all the risks associated with it. So you have technical risk, you have capital risk, you have management risk. You should just basically accept those, okay? And you allocate your resources towards product and value creation. And if you have to abandon a program, you should do that. But don't abandon it too early because the data didn't come out the way you expected, because that's a part of that. So you should look at new developments. You know that your investors and shareholder boards are going to be risk averse. And so your management team has to navigate that water for you and make sure that you have key opinion leaders on your side. If your physicians and key opinion leaders and regulatory people will say this is worth doing, the investors and the shareholders will take a back seat. In the US, that's a key part. So we hire a lot of SAB members who are industry veterans. So these are valuations from recent deals. I won't spend time. You guys all know that number. This is my last slide. So here is what we have to look at. So the new movement in the United States is value-based medicine, because 80% of our healthcare spending is for the last 20% of patients' life. So we've been looking at how to improve the quality of life of these patients and give them good quality of life and save them money. So we are looking at biotech as how to minimize the enterprise risk from a scientific, commercial, or a reimbursement standpoint. We are looking at management risk really, really hard, what sort of teams we're going to assemble, and we're going to get rid of inexperienced board members if they're not right. We get rid of wrong kind of investors as well, and we really look at patient impact the most for value-based medicine, because that actually defines the overall success of the enterprise, and then everybody wins: patients, physicians, employees, partners, shareholders, and society. Thank you very much. Good. 40 minutes.
Thank you, Doctor. Can I invite you to have a seat? Yeah. So I'd also now like to invite Mr. Krishna Kumar, our Associate Director of IIE, to come on the stage and facilitate Q&A. So for any of you, if you have any questions, do head over to the microphones by the sides. Just need to tell us your name, and then you can ask your question. Thank you.
So a few ground rules before we start. Keep your questions very succinct and to the point, and one question per person, please. And I know that we started a little late, and for a lot of people it's down to lunchtime. So we'll take 5 questions, and then after that, the others can step out, and anybody else who wants to interact with Dr. Pravin can do so at the end of that. Okay? So, please.
Hi,
yes,
Dr. Chaturvedi.
Could you please state your name and where you're from?
I'm Hong Wei from Tarex Pharmaceutical.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'd like to know, for a small biotech company, when is a good time to actually go to the public market to raise funds, like IPO in the US NASDAQ?
The short answer is I don't know. I don't think there's ever a time. We've had a couple of very good years, sir, in the last 2 years, but as I mentioned, only 25 or so have gone public. Many of us who are serial entrepreneurs, we don't like becoming public. So we try to reverse merge, or we sell our company before we go public to a public company. Because I think the regulatory compliance piece of it is almost detrimental to building the company. So I think the timing would be right. You will know. People have gone IPOs even in 2007, which was probably our worst year after 2001, 2002. I think your board and your management team would know. I think if you have, the rule used to be about 10 years, 15 years ago, that you had 2 programs in the clinical phase 2, and you had 2 partnerships with large pharma on 2 programs. Those were the key ingredients for doing an IPO. That thing has changed now, and now you can have 1 program in phase 3 and you can do an IPO. The trouble is if it's just 1 program in phase 3 and if that phase 3 dies, and especially in these rare disease companies that have gone public, they are living on a knife edge because they just have 1 program. So I think the fundamentals of having at least 2 programs deep in the clinic and at least having 2 partners, I think those still apply. And a few of our companies have gone public with those, and they still are living and have aggregated value. So I think that still is the right time, or those are the right ingredients. It doesn't mean that the rare disease companies that have gone public are going to fail, but they just live and die every day because of 1 program. You're welcome.
Hello.
Yeah, hi.
I'm from Institute of Medical Biology, A-Star, Gajadhar Bhakta. I'm a research scientist there.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned that, and you acknowledged throughout your talk that biotech is associated with a lot of risk. So my question is, for a scientist, young scientist like me, who intend to venture into those areas, startups and all. So one side I want to go to that side, I want to try. But on the other side, young scientists also have a family commitment. which requires a stable income. So what your advice for a young scientist like me to go about this?
It's a good question. I think experience matters. So if you want to do biotech, I would say if there's a young biotech company in Singapore or anywhere in the region that you can go in and join at an early stage, somebody that has received Series A or Series B of funding, so that they can provide you some experience of living dangerously, but still making a paycheck. And then you will learn from that experience. And then when you come out, you'll be better prepared. I think taking a job, which is a well-paying job or a high-paying job at a government institution or a pharma company will be a disincentive for you to do new biotechs. And if you go directly from there into a new biotech, it'll be a very different experience because you have to learn to mop the floor, make your own coffee, clean the windows. When it rains, your roof is broken. You have to know how to manage your equipment. And I think all of that you learn in a smaller enterprise. So my advice to you would be, if you're at A-Star and they're starting a new company that has received some funding, become a part of that first. And reach out to good colleagues that you can build a team, and then you can build a new company. But don't go directly into a new venture. That would be a recipe for disaster. Hope that's a fair answer.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
I think your comprehensive provision is mind-boggling. My name is Ais. I'm just a layperson, sir. But I have difficulty to understand because over the years, the emphasis is very much on value, whereas the mantra, the DNA of virtue did not combine till now. Now, my question is that the overriding factors on the cure and the scented antibiotics and the antidotes override many social implications. Now, my question is that because in your dimension, mindsets, instead of mind shine, you have the situation where you say the emphasis very much on discovery and breakthrough. But too often, for example, like Warner Lambert were doing Listerine, it's just basic common sense matter and common sense problem.
Yeah.
Now, my question here is that life sciences is very much, hardcore life science is very much for the firm believer and not faint-hearted. But we on the other sector, on my side, working on new discovery, new reformulation, new engineering, new chemistry, we very much focus on the synthetic biology, very much. So you did not mention within your dimension, does that include in your overall parameters? And do you have any portfolios in the context of synthetic biologies? And do you have your kind of inputs in that particular dimension, sir? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That's a good question. Well, I think I mentioned that we are open to every technology. And so one of the things that when you create a biotech enterprise is you have to look at the value of the overall entity. And that means it's a integration of all technologies. And so one of the things I mentioned is you have to be vigilant about new technologies and development. So if synthetic biology is going to give you an edge, you should absolutely access that. If that's what's going to get you a starting point, you should absolutely do that. So I think if you begin at the end, you will get to the end. But if you begin at the beginning, you'll never get to the end. So in biotech, it's very true, and that's why I talked about target product profiles, because you have to think about what is it that you want to look, your label has to look like. So if you're making a drug or a product to address a certain unmet need, then any and all technologies are fair game. But don't make the technology the end-all, be-all, because that will be not successful. Make the enterprise value the end-all, be-all, and then it'll be an amalgamation, an integration of various technologies. Synthetic biology is certainly included in all of our companies. It's just not, we don't cornerstone anything, because selling technology as a biotech base is a thing of the past. That was in vogue 22, 25 years ago. No longer is the case.
Okay, if you don't have any other questions. Yeah. That will be the last question. After that, if anybody wants to interact, then we can take it offline.
I'm a co-founder of a biotech company.
Congratulations.
It's 6 years old. I agree with a lot of your chit-chat on difficulties of setting up a biotechnology company in the Boston area. But you try and set up a company here in Singapore, you find more frustration. I can tell you that. But I have one question here. One is, what is your success rate as a serial entrepreneur?
Oh, it's a question of the hour. So knock on wood, all my companies are around and have made products in various forms. So two companies have merged, been acquired. One of them is merging with another one, and we're going public. Another one has gone public. So I've been lucky. But I think it's because my teams are so good, and I don't micromanage. But I'm luckier than others. I will accept.
Okay. My company is planning for IPO. Unfortunately, it'll be outside Singapore next year. So I may have a chat with you and see. Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. Is there any questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of IIE SMU, we would like to present a token of appreciation to Dr. Chaturvedi.
Oh my God.
Let's give him a round of applause again.
Oh, Cassie, thank you. Thanks very much. Wow. What a picture.